Welcome to Brian's Briefing, part of the Brian Nichols Show. I'm Brian Nichols, and in these focused episodes, I dive into key issues, ideas, and principles that shape our world. No frills, no fluff, just straight talk on matters that count. Now, let's get started. Today, we're going to take a little trip to a tropical paradise, but don't worry, we're not here for a vacation. We're actually going to use this island getaway to break down some basic economic principles, and trust me, it's going to be a lot more fun than that sounds. So picture this. We've got this small, isolated island with a simple economy, and the folks there use seashells as money and trade them for coconuts. Pretty straightforward, right? One shell gets you one coconut. But what happens when something disrupts this simple system? Let's meet a couple of our island friends. First, we've got Sarah. She's a coconut farmer, and then Tom, who collects seashells. Each day, Sarah produces about 10 coconuts, and Tom finds about 10 shells. And they trade at the end of the day, and everyone's happy. It's a simple system, but it works for them. But this is where things get interesting. One day, a big ship of tourists shows up, and these tourists are all about shells. And when they leave, they dump thousands of them on the beach. Suddenly, Tom and his buddies have way more shells than before. Now, what do you think happens next? Well, Tom goes to Sarah and he's like, "Hey Sarah, here's 2 shells for 1 coconut." And the islanders start doing the same thing, and before you know it, the new normal is 5 shells for every 1 coconut. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is basically how inflation works in the real world. When there's suddenly more money floating around, each individual dollar or shell is worth less. It's like when you're playing Monopoly and someone suggests using 2 sets of money, and then suddenly everyone's a millionaire, but it doesn't actually mean anything because everything costs more. And this causes all sorts of problems on our little island. Sarah might think about working harder to produce more coconuts, but she quickly realizes that the extra work doesn't actually increase her buying power. Everything else on the island is getting more expensive too, and she's running faster just to stay in the same place. And it's not just coconuts, fish, fruit, you name it, all the prices are going up in terms of shells. And islanders who had savings in shells are watching their nest eggs lose value right before their eyes. Imagine saving up shells for years trying to buy a nice canoe and then suddenly realizing your savings are worth a fraction of what they used to be. That'd be pretty disheartening. It gets even messier when you think about the long-term stuff. Now imagine if someone had taken out a loan of 100 shells before all this happened. Now that loan is worth a lot less in terms of coconuts or other goods. On the surface, this might seem good for the borrower, it's easier to pay back, but it's terrible for the lender. And in the long run, it makes people less likely to lend shells in the future. I mean, why would you lend if you know you're going to get paid back in less valuable shells? Now, you might be thinking, well, Brian, this is all interesting, but okay, what does this have to do with real world, not this make-believe tropical island? Well, let me tell you, and this is not just, about this made-up island. This stuff happens right now and is happening right now in the real world all the time. And when you hear about the Fed printing money or increasing the money supply, it's not all that different from the tourist ship just dumping shells on the beach. I mean, think about it. When the government increases the money supply, like they did with all those stimulus checks during the pandemic, for example, it's just like adding more shells to the economy. And just like our island example, this can lead to inflation, meaning your dollars, like those shells, just don't go as far as they used to. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting. In our island example, everyone can see what's happening. They can literally see the piles of shells on the beach. And in the real world, it's not always so obvious. The government doesn't simply dump physical dollars on the street. Instead, they use complex financial mechanisms that can be very hard for the average person to simply understand. But the effect is the exact same. More money in the system, leading to each dollar being worth less. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, "But Brian, isn't inflation sometimes a good thing? Don't we need a little bit of inflation for a healthy economy?" And I'm gonna just stop you in your tracks. Guys, yes, I can hear the argument that a small, controlled amount of inflation could encourage spending and investment, which could be good for economic growth, but the problem comes when inflation gets out of control, like on our island here. So what can we learn from our island friends? Well, for one, we can see the importance of a stable currency. When the medium of exchange, shells in this case, dollars and ours, becomes unstable, it throws the whole system out of whack. It makes it harder for people to save, harder for businesses to plan, and can lead to all sorts of economic distortions. We can also see how inflation can act as a hidden tax. The islanders with savings and shells didn't do anything wrong, but they're still losing purchasing power. And in the real world, this often hits retirees and others on fixed incomes the hardest. But let's not leave our island friends in the lurch. What can they do about this mess? Well, they've got a few options. They could create a new currency that's actually backed by something real, like coconuts, and this is similar to how currencies used to be backed by gold. Or maybe they could allow different types of currencies to compete, letting people choose what they want to trade with, kind of like what we're seeing today with cryptocurrencies in the real world. Are you concerned about preserving your liberty and wealth in these uncertain times? Then you don't want to miss this year's Expat Money Summit, taking place online from October 7th through the 11th. Hosted by expat consultant Mikkel Thorup, this summit brings together over 40 experts to share their insights on international diversification. You're going to discover how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get an in-depth geopolitical analysis from thought leaders like Dr. Ron Paul and Doug Casey. Tickets are completely free. Just head to expatmoneysummit.com to reserve yours today. Take control of your future at the Expat Money Summit. That's expatmoneysummit.com. And now, back to the show. Cryptocurrencies are trying to solve the exact problem our island leaders here are facing. Bitcoin, for example, has a fixed supply, and kind of like the islanders deciding to only use a specific number of shells and no more. And this is meant to prevent the kind of inflation we saw in our island example. The idea is that by having currency that can't be arbitrarily increased, you protect its value over time. But it's not a perfect solution. Cryptocurrencies have their own challenges, like wild price swings and scalability issues. Now, here's the thing. Even though it's complex, the basic principles we've discussed with our island example still apply today. When there's more money chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices go up. And when prices go up faster than wages, people feel the pinch. So what can we do about it? Well, as individuals, we can try to protect ourselves from inflation by making smart financial decisions, and that might mean reaching out to folks like our good buddy Joe Lombardi at Ironhawk Financial and asking for help in terms of where to invest and what smart economic decisions he would recommend we make. And it definitely means staying very much informed on the economic trends and how they might impact your personal finances. But beyond that, I think it's really important for us to really understand the very basic economic principles. Why? Because these economic principles actually inform policy decisions that impact all of us. So when politicians talk about monetary policy or government spending, these are the kinds of effects that they're dealing with. And as voters and citizens, we need to be able to critically evaluate these policies and evaluate the politicians. All right, before we wrap up, let's take a moment to address a question from one of our listeners. This is coming from Janet in Wisconsin. She asks, Brian, with all this talk about inflation and monetary policy, I'm wondering, do you think our current economic system is sustainable in the long run, or are we heading for some kind of major reset? A great reset? I kid. Or do I? Wow, Janet. No, seriously, that is a big question, and definitely one I think we're all asking right now. It really gets to the heart of a lot of the issues we've been discussing, not just today, but frankly in a lot of our episodes with a lot of our guests recently. And to be honest, I mean, I have the same exact concerns you have in terms of long-term sustainability of our current economic system. When we're looking at our economy, it's been built on what has been really, it's required constant growth and ever-increasing debt levels just to maintain stability. And that's more or less if you were on a treadmill that just keeps speeding up. Just to be able to stay in place, you still have to run faster and faster, right? It gets tough. You hit that 10-mile-an-hour mark and you're going to be gasping for air pretty quick. And there comes a point where you're like, okay, I can't keep doing this anymore. And that right there, I mean, the way we handle money, creation, debt, monetary policy, I mean, that is exactly going back to our island example. I mean, if we keep adding more shells to the system, hoping it's going to solve our problems, we're just, I mean, it's the definition of insanity. But at some point, you just got to wonder, how long can we just keep pretending? How long can this really actually go on and just head in the sand? But that being said, you know me, I am not a doom and gloom guy. Human ingenuity is powerful. Look at Bitcoin, and we have, definitely overcome some very big economic challenges in the past. But I mean, I think we're at a point right now where we need to start making some big changes, like really big changes in our economic system right now. And what that might look like, I mean, it could talk about, let's think, rethinking our entire monetary system, right? Like, let's move away from what we have now and towards something more decentralized, like leveraging crypto, or something therein. It might mean, reassessing our relationship with debt, both at a personal and national level. And it almost certainly will require us to grapple with the issues of sustainability and resource management in a way that we haven't before. And frankly, I don't think we're prepared for as a country. It's gonna hit hard. And I think the key also is education and engagement. Like, the more people who understand how our economic system actually works beyond the headlines and beyond the political talking points, the better equipped we're going to be to help make smart decisions, but also to push for legitimate, meaningful reforms. And that's why I think we have to keep having these complex conversations and breaking it down into more easy to understand ways and more digestible ways, like my silly island example today. Because at the end of the day, it's gonna take all of us, not just folks like, you and me, who I know you're a Politico, who we talk about this all day long, but we need to make this so it makes sense to your average person. So thank you for your question, Janet. Now, let's go to our challenge of the week. All right, let's actually put the brakes on that. Before we go to the challenge of the week this week, let's follow up on last week's challenge. Now, remember, I asked you to dig into how a proposed tax on unrealized gains might impact small businesses in your local economy. And per usual, you guys absolutely knocked it out of the park with your responses. We had Rebecca up in Oregon. She said she talked to a local hardware store owner, Joe. Joe actually had heard the proposal. She was there buying her normal stuff, she said, and she talked to Joe. He was shocked by the idea of paying taxes on just increased inventory that he would have before he'd have to sell it. That was one of the things that he'd have to probably deal with. And he said he'd probably have to take out loans just to cover the tax bill, making it harder to invest in new products or hire more help. Mike from Florida, he spoke to several small business owners when he was out and about. A restaurant owner named Maria said she'd have to sell off some of her kitchen equipment probably to pay the taxes on her business's increased unrealized value. A construction company said that they were worried about what it would do to impact their ability to take on bigger projects. And then Lisa from California chatted with local tech startup founders that she's networked with. And they said that they were very concerned about how this would impact their ability to attract new investors, potentially forcing startups to move overseas to move to more tax-friendly countries. Oof. Yeah, these real-world examples right there, right? That is what matters. And that is why I thank you for responding to our challenge of the weeks. It is that right there that I just love to be able to share. I mean, it hurts to be able to share that, but we have to share that because that's real life. It's one thing to talk about, economic growth or tax burdens, but it's another thing to hear entirely from real life purple people. I promise I'm going to make it through this. Like Joe, right, from the hardware store, or Maria from her restaurant. So real life people, real life concerns, and these real life issues need to be heard. So let's keep them coming. Now let's move to this week's challenge. This week, I want you to think about how our island economy example in this scenario might play out in your own community. What would happen if suddenly there was just an influx of money floating around? How might that affect local businesses? How might that impact your savings? Or how might that impact the cost of living? And here's what I want you to do. First, go talk to a few local business owners. And by the way, you don't have to do this. These are just ideas. Talk to local business owners. Ask them how they would handle a sudden increase in money supply. Like just boom, $1 billion in your town. What would they do? Would they raise prices? Would they change their inventory practices? Would they alter their investment plans? How about this? Number 2, check out the prices of some everyday items in your area. And then just in general, keep track of them for a few weeks and see if you notice any changes. And just imagine the small changes you see in things like food, gas, rent, right? Imagine what that might look like if there was all of a sudden, let's just say again, $1 billion hitting your local economy. And third, how about this? Think about your own savings or debts. Like, how would those be impacted if the value of the dollar just suddenly changed? Would your savings strategy need to change? Would you be saving at all? Would your debt become more or less burdensome? These are things I want you to really think about. So share your findings with me between now and next week. Email me, Brian at briannicholsshow.com if you want to go ahead and respond to our challenge of the week, or if you want to go ahead and submit a listener question. Again, Brian at briannicholsshow.com. And again, remember, understanding this stuff isn't just academic. It's real. It impacts us all in very, very, very real ways. And the more we understand it, the more better we are equipped to make good decisions, both personally, individually, but also as a society. So with that, before we wrap up, I just want to emphasize something important. Economics can seem dry. I know, I get that. It can seem abstract, but it doesn't have to be. At its core, economics is about how we, as humans, make human decisions and interact with each other in a human type of way. And it's about those choices that we make every day. What to buy, where to work, how to save, and when we break it down to simple examples like our silly island economy, we can start to see how these really big, complex systems actually work. So the next time you hear about inflation in the news, or you see a headline about the Federal Reserve, please think back to our island friends and their seashell troubles. Seashell? Seashells, but a seashore. I promise I will never do that again. Because at the end of the day, whether we're talking about seashells or dollars, coconuts or computers, the basic principles remain the same. All right, folks, that's all for today. Remember, economics doesn't have to be all charts and graphs or fancy words. Sometimes all you need is an island, some coconuts, and a bunch of seashells to understand the basics. Keep thinking critically, keep questioning everything, and keep being awesome. This is Brian Nichols signing off. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.